Hi, Chris.
Hello.
I remember, I think it was last year, you were at our office, EVN. We were in the kitchen, sitting around having a coffee. And I don't know how the subject came up. I don't know how we ended up where we ended up. But as we always do, we always fall into these rabbit holes of memory and things that we've experienced for those of us who've lived long enough. Especially the way we've lived with Armenia through the independence movement, the Karabakh movement, the war, and everything that's happened. So you were sitting, I remember, at the head of the table, and you were talking about the early years of independence, and right after Armenia had gained independence in '91, and you were in New York, and you were working with the Armenian mission to the United Nations, and you were telling these fascinating stories, and everybody in that kitchen later came up to me and said, damn, we didn't know these stories. We didn't know about these things. And it's true, because in many ways you, Chris Simone, are not a very public person, are you?
No, I am not.
But you have a legacy of prolific people in your life. Your grandfather was Alex Manoogian, your mother, Louise Simone. They were very public figures.
Yes, yes.
And I remember the first time you sent me an email, a very lovely email, and it was signed Chris Simone. And I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I had no idea who you were. But you have been in the middle of the story, but you haven't been seen. Why?
Well, I had the privilege, with my grandfather and my mother, I had the privilege of witnessing and being present and in the room in so many fascinating situations. With my grandfather, I traveled with him since I was 12, so I saw a lot. That was more focused on the diaspora, even though he did eventually work in Armenia. He had come to Armenia. With Vasken Vapar, he built the Treasury Museum at Etchmiadzin, which I believe was the first time a diasporan was ever allowed to build a building. And then my mother, actually I should go back a little bit, when on the occasion of the opening of that museum, my grandfather said to my mother and I, "Oh, you should come on this trip." My mother was not involved in anything Armenian, and she was working on cultural projects in Detroit, revitalization of Detroit. I grew up in a very American environment. I was not.
You didn't speak Armenian.
I didn't speak Armenian. My mother and father, both Armenian, did not speak Armenian, and so we didn't have it in the household. The only irony is that my grandfather built so many schools and churches and centers that taught Armenian, and he didn't push or make.
But that generation in North America, they were all the same. They wanted their children to integrate, to be American.
And in where I grew up, there was discrimination, and I definitely felt that discrimination. So I think part of it was his wanting to ease that. It wasn't close to where we lived, and there were no Armenians where we lived. So no, we didn't have the language in the household. And then we came on the trip with him.
This is 1982.
1982, and my mother got stuck in Moscow without a visa and was sent out of the country and had to come back. That was a very interesting but long story.
But you've told us this story. I don't understand how Louise Simone ends up in Moscow without a visa.
So she had the visa when we checked in. Okay,
checked in where?
In New York. Oh. Okay, because she couldn't have gotten on the plane.
Oh, okay.
So we know she had the visa there. But I don't know what happened in the meantime. Frankly, when we were arriving in Moscow, I remember her saying to me, "I can't find my visa, I can't find my visa."
Was it not in the passport?
No, it wasn't attached to the passport. And it was in it, but it wasn't stapled to it. And so I was, after how many hour flight, I was not the most sympathetic. I couldn't believe she really lost it. So I was like, please. But she really lost it, and they took her, and so I was like, you can't take her, you have to. And I didn't know what to do. I took her luggage. I'm not sure why I did
that. So you left your mom in Moscow and you came to Yerevan?
No, I did not know. I stayed in Moscow. And actually it was quite a story. I mean, the minute they took her, I didn't know what happened. I was on the phone as fast as I could be to somebody we knew who had high-level contacts.
And you're a lawyer, so that...
Yeah, a lawyer did not help in that circumstance whatsoever. So I was trying to get to the State Department, and just trying to get the phone call through. The person I was trying to reach, I couldn't reach, so I called the brother. It was this kind of thing. They started working on it, but I was frantic, and I made a very big mistake. I did not call my grandfather and say this happened.
Where was he?
He was still back in Michigan, and I was scared. He was older. I thought, I don't want to upset him. I don't want to, but I didn't understand that contacts matter. Like everything was about. But so I was trying everything. Of course, this brash New Yorker, I'm like, in tourist, listen, I need to know where she is. You have to tell me, blah, blah, blah. And that is not working at all.
Well, it's the Soviet Union.
Yeah, I'm like, give me a phone book. There's like, phone book? One day, this is like a couple-day affair, and so one day I was just so tired, and I was walking around like this, and I noticed in the lobby, everybody's looking at me like almost with sympathy. And I thought to myself, oh my God, they know what it is like to have a relative taken, So the whole day I was like, I would sit in a chair with my head hung, just very, very, very.
On purpose?
On purpose, because I was like, I'm not getting anywhere with find my mother stuff. So, and somebody later, I think it was the next day, came up, took my hand, and put a piece of paper in my hand. And I was like, what is this? And so I go back to my room, which, by the way, has been searched already 3 times. While I'm down there trying to do something, they're rifling through our stuff. And there was a phone number on the piece of paper. And I called the phone number, and my mother answered. I'm like,
your
Mom?
Mother's number.
Yeah, I'm like, Mom, where are you? And my mother is like, can you believe they brought me to the most expensive hotel in town? I told them we paid for a room at this other hotel. I'm like, Mom, let's focus. I don't think that's the issue. Exactly what's happening. She says, well, I'm under house arrest. There's 2 guards outside my door. I told them, don't lock me in here. I'm going to get upset. Whatever. Bottom line, we could not, the most I could negotiate was to see her and give her luggage, and they were going to send her out of the country. Why? Because they could not take the pictures for the visa, the small picture. So she had to go to Helsinki and then come back.
So hang on a second. So they keep her in an expensive hotel. They don't have the equipment or the camera or the whatever so they send her to Helsinki to get a photo, and then she comes back?
Then she comes back.
And where were you? You were waiting for her in Moscow?
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, to be honest with you, we went to Leningrad for a few days.
Oh, okay.
She was going to be a few days. So then we came back to Moscow, and she came back. And then we continued on. But it was really eye-opening. I say to people, I am an American. I'm now an American and an Armenian citizen, but I really appreciate America. I love the country. But when I came to Moscow at that time, I was like, oh my God, we complain. We think we have problems, whatever.
We have no idea.
I was like, you need to understand what the real. So I was much more appreciative. It was very hard, but it was hard because I didn't know how to maneuver. I made mistakes. I should have called Grandpa, who would call Valfar, who would call,
Well, hindsight is always like that anyway.
Yes. So, but anyway, it's a story for a lifetime. My mother was fine. She came back. She was tough. She was, complaining that she had to pay the hotel bill. I was like, this is not the problem.
So she's under house arrest and then she has to pay for the hotel room?
Yeah, that's what they did. And she was like, but we booked a hotel. Can I stay in that room? You could stay there. But they wanted to, I think, separate us. And so that was the issue. And
so after that adventure, where you slide in a trip to Leningrad, you come to Armenia. This is your first time? For both of you.
Yeah.
And, I remember we've had many discussions, Chris, and, and again, you said at the beginning that you had a very American life, even though you had a grandfather who was doing, unbelievable philanthropy for the Armenian nation and the diaspora, and then later in Armenia. And you said that trip changed your mother.
Yes, it changed my mother. We came, there were a lot of official lunches and dinners. And by the second day, my mother's like, no, we can't do this. We want to see the country. Now, this was Soviet times, so you actually couldn't travel freely. But we were really desperate to see outside of Yerevan. And so Vaskan Valpar did arrange for us. He assigned a priest, and they took us each day somewhere new. First day, it was just in a car with us two. We would go to, I don't know, Obovian or wherever, and he would show us, and then he would say, okay, let's knock on a door. And we would be like, what?
Coming from New York.
You're just going to bother? I mean, you're just going to interrupt these people? And he'd be like, no, let's knock on the door. And he would knock on the door and people would welcome us in. And before we knew it, there's a table of food and we're talking. And it was, it really was something for us. And then by the third day, a couple other people who were part of the trip said, wait a minute, you have to take us with you. And by the fourth day, we had a van. So I don't know how they got the permissions, but they did. And I just think something clicked in her. She had never been involved in Armenian things. Of course we had respect. Of course we were connected to her father, my grandfather, and involved in what he was doing. But she really didn't have the connection. And something clicked in her. And she looked at this country and she said, oh my God, this is where we have to put energy. At that time, she wasn't the head of AGB. I mean, she was just still working tangentially in the Armenian community. I think she was working on paying off the debt of the diocese or whatever. And it's not like she did anything right away, but it was something that changed her. And then by 85, we came back with a film crew to do a film on the genocide. And again, a lot of traveling throughout the country. By 86, 87, she was bringing businessmen. And she brought Ruben Terzian, who had a toy company.
Armin Toys.
He started Armin Toy, a joint venture. I mean, it was like the Wild West in terms of agreements.
It was a Wild West for a long time.
But this is a Soviet business structure now, right?
Yeah.
So. And she kept at it. And
she had tunnel vision, it seems, didn't she?
She had a vision. I would say she had she just had a vision of what it could be. I think many diasporans, we struggle with what we're doing in the diaspora, but this was vital. This is a country. And we were seeing the beginnings of the movement by that time, not in 82, but by that time, we were understanding the undercurrents, and it was something we supported. I will say, I don't think she had a lot of support from other people. This was her vision, and she
in the diaspora.
Well, diaspora is a big place.
Sure.
But she was at AGBU at that time, but there was maybe concern or not complete support. And then, of course, the earthquake happens, and I remember being at her house. We got a call. We knew it was bad. And then I don't know if it was several hours or the next day, the State Department called and said, we're going to go with dogs. And does your mother want to be on the plane? And I was like, oh my God, this is really bad. And she left. And she went. And, it was then the process first, tremendous amounts of donations, managing that, working, the US government gave planes to take the cargo over. And that was organizing those plane loads. And then I came in like January, February, and with her again. So there was that focus. I think she at that point was already thinking of opening an office at AGBU. I'm getting the timing not exact, but shortly, 89, I think, Armandir Garoyan and Mirana Babian came to her with the idea of a university that would have a specialty of seismology to address the earthquake issues. And I always tell the story, actually Armin told it to me, but I tell the story because it's about how my mother really didn't have the background or the education, but somehow she had this executive ability. And she just insightfully knew when something had to be structured. And she said to them, I don't know, am I talking to two individuals here? You need an institution behind you. And they went back and they got
an institution.
Yeah, they got University of California as a backbone for the beginnings of AUA.
Right.
And so AUA was established. And once they came back, she was like, okay, yeah, ready to go. And, again, it's a vision. And then when we were looking at buildings for AUA, we settled on the building. And she put the AGBU office on the first floor of the AUA building. So that was, I believe, the first office of any diasporan organization in Armenia in 1989. So
I'm going to interrupt you for a second because there's so many threads to the story and there's so many layers to your story and your family's story. So the earthquake happens, your mom's on one of the first planes, she's here, instrumental in the establishment of the American University of Armenia, and then years and years of that kind of philanthropy and work. At the same time, the Qarabağ movement is growing. And you had brought back some photos from the States. We've all seen those photos on those images, and people who lived here actually, they participated. But for us, who were on the outside, just incredible images. And that, it was inspirational for all of us. But your mother wasn't the only member of your family having a pivotal role. You, at that time, start working with the Republic of Armenia's mission to the United Nations.
Yeah, and even a little before that, because I traveled with my mother to Artsakh, 89, 90. Volsky, we met with Volsky there, when it was, Gorbachev had appointed him to take control of Artsakh for a short period of time, I think. And then when I got home, I really did want to stay involved. And of course, these are very vital, vital issues. I was an activist as a young person in civil rights in America, but this was really something. This hits you in the gut like, oh my God, not only these are my people, this is a struggle for something, existential, very, very deep. So they had representation in New York. Alex Manoogian was there as representation before the admission to the UN. And I was working with him and trying to help in using my skills as a lawyer and structuring whatever. And he had said, do you want to, Armenia didn't have the diplomats to fill all the offices. And I was mentioning to you, it wasn't just Armenia. The Baltics too drew on their diaspora in those first years. And I was thinking, oh yeah, this is like, yeah, I'll do this. This is exciting. I said it like that, but I did feel pressure there. I had the skills as a lawyer to negotiate resolutions, to fight over issues. That I did, but I did not have the diplomatic history, the diplomatic knowledge. I was a little embarrassed by that. I later went to Harvard and got a master's in that because I felt that was a huge gap in my education. And so I started doing that, and there was another diaspora and another Armenian. And yes, I had my committee assignments. We were fighting. And Artsakh was before the Security Council. Nagorno-Karabakh was in the Security Council at that time. So it was a hugely stressful time. I was telling you the story that the issue I was working on, which was in the second committee, Finance Committee, was an issue that I actually partnered with Azerbaijan on because we had the same interests on the thing, but then we would go fight in the Security Council. So it was one of these things where you had to compartmentalize a little bit. And yeah, it was great. It was great, but I left that for a number of reasons. I wouldn't say the office was functioning that well. And I thought, okay, well, I think I can be of better use. And the comment I got from everybody, all the other diplomats, everybody was, we do not know what's going on. We have no information. I mean, this is 93 now, right? So I thought, well, I could pull that together. I had used Lexis as a lawyer. They have LexisNexis. You get all the news stories if you program the search properly. I would read 300 stories a day, pick out the ones that were the most relevant. Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Turkey to the extent it bore on Armenia, and Russia to the extent that it bore on Armenia. And I put together this, and I summarized these stories and put the site. And then I started faxing it. I started faxing it to the Security Council members. I faxed it to Armenian organizations. I
wonder if some people, young people, even know what a fax machine is anymore.
Yeah. And so that taught me a great lesson. That taught me if you fill a void, a hunger will come at you. Information is so imperative. People started contacting me from everywhere to get this thing. And it was really interesting. I hate to say this because I feel so old, but this is the time when you're using a modem and you're uploading and downloading and emails just starting. And so actually we had to educate people how to do this. I even wrote an article called Modem or Modem. So to try to do it, and I'd get a call from somebody 75 years old saying, "Oh, I'd really, really like to have this newsletter, but I don't know how to do it." And I said, "Do you have a grandson? Could you have him call me?" And we just did it, and it went. It just took off.
You did that for years, I believe, right?
I did it for. To the ceasefire, I did it daily. When the ceasefire was signed, I went to weekly. I was very, very tired. I couldn't find somebody to really do this well. And things were starting to happen. I had one employee come from another Armenian organization just to steal the whole process so they could start there. So I was like, more power to you.
Take it,
do it well. Armenia started to do a little bit of it in their own. Even the AGBU office started to produce its own newsletter. So I could move on from that. And I actually went back to Harvard to get a master's in public administration with this concentration in international security diplomacy. And then went back to the UN because I wanted to be there with that knowledge. Like now I felt like I deserved
You have the tools.
It. Yeah,
tools. But Chris, in the early years, even before independence, the movement, the war, your family was heavily involved in supporting Armenia. A number of families were who had the means. Those must have been incredibly trying times when people, government leaders are reaching out to the diaspora. There's a war raging, and look at the asymmetry of power here, and looking for assistance.
From our perspective, it was both hugely stressful. Many crises. You just didn't know if you wake up in the morning what's next. But
we're still living like that.
Yeah, we're still living. I pray for the day when we move beyond shock, crisis, relief. But it was it was exhilarating to be a part of it. So we were, we weren't focusing on how, but I would say with my mother, she was in constant dialogue. So it's not like, she also produced a magazine, and that magazine, because she was trying to, she was trying to show the diaspora really what was going on the ground. So she was, talking to the leaders of the Artsakh, well, then the president. I mean, the Artsakh, many of the committee members came into the government, and she was working really closely with them. So we understood to a certain extent, because in retrospect, we were not told a lot of things, but to a certain extent, we understood where they were going, what they wanted to try to do. I mean, just, blockade, no electricity. I mean, you could have goals, but you couldn't necessarily accomplish them that easily. So from that standpoint, there was a very dynamic relationship, and I think she was very well respected, and she was, as I said, constantly talking to those, and I, had the privilege of also being a part of that and seeing that. So,
you've always been there, right? I mean, you told me once that the way you wanted to be close to your grandfather was to learn about Armenia, about the Armenians, about history. So, and you said earlier he took you on trips with him since you were a little girl. And then the same with your mother. You have a wealth of experience and memories.
Yeah, I mean, with my mother was different. By that time, we were working more like partners. With my grandfather, yeah, he was a very quiet man in the home. Even though he was very magnanimous in public, he was very quiet. And I wanted to find a way to connect with him. So I would just see him reading these papers all the time about Armenian news, letters, communications, everything. So I would read the papers and ask him questions and things like that. And that's how I have two brothers, and they're not involved at all.
Yeah.
So
we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. So it was really my desire to connect with him. And then he was just like, oh, this is great. And my mother was very different. We were more like sisters than mother-daughter, and we were very much a partner. I had really a lot of things that could help her. And of course, just a level of trust that was, unconditional. And
speaking of trust, I'm curious, Armenia diaspora divide doesn't seem to be getting narrower. Sometimes it does, other times it's like a chasm and we can't bridge it. And sometimes for legitimate reasons. I don't want to get into sort of all of that, but I'm sort of fixated on those early years because we were all in. Well, were they all in?
I have a different perspective on that, because I actually think there was a huge trust problem those days, and I feel that's much less now.
Okay.
I think that there was such a gap, and there was...
I mean, because we didn't know each other.
We did not know each other. I always say it's like two twins are born at birth and separated. And then you come together when you're 20, and you're supposed to feel like family. Well, it takes a while. You've had different experiences. You grow up differently. You have to, it's a relationship that has to be negotiated. I would say it was very difficult. There was some anger by the Armenians from Armenia that they held the country. We were out. We had it good. We lived out. My position always was, well, wait a minute. But use me for my skills. I'm here to help. But it wasn't as easy as that. I wouldn't say that the conversations were as honest. Like, I feel now that people are much more honest, open. First of all, Armenia is 30 years plus developed, okay? That's, 2-3 years, and people are transitioning from a Soviet society, which didn't allow that much freedom to express whatever. And, but there was a huge gap, and there was tremendous difficulties in having true partnerships and working together. And I think that's why a lot of diasporans who did want to do something came and created something they controlled. But
they were very few. Otherwise, it was mostly emotional. It was very knee-jerk. It was, and that's why so many businesses in the early years failed, because there wasn't that mutual understanding of the situation, of the circumstances.
They failed because of that. They also failed because we didn't have a business structure or court system that actually supported healthy businesses. And that was a huge problem. People came, they set up businesses, they were cheated, they couldn't get any enforcement. It was who you knew, do you know this judge? I mean, those were really serious problems. And so that got in the way a lot. And I just think that it took time for the relationship to develop. Now, from my perspective, I see a sea change from like 2010 to now. And I attribute it more to the fact that so many people have gone out, gotten education or business experience.
And returned.
And they are much more open-minded, much more, the skill level is much greater. So I think the potential is great now, but it's one of the reasons, like we talked about this too, it's one of the reasons I bought a home here.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because you took a hiatus, let's say, from Armenia.
Yes, I
for
did.
whatever reasons.
Yes, I was, there's this love-hate relationship.
Sure.
There was much more so, I think, in the early days, because it was so tough to really get things done, and relationships were, from my perspective, much more difficult. And I did. I took a 10-year break from coming to
Tiny
Armenia.
break, yeah. But now you're back, and it's interesting because, we've talked about repatriation. There's been so much going on in the last couple of years in our lives. The change, the revolution, and then the war, and then the loss of Artsakh, and it's just been, for those of us who are following it and are deeply engaged, and by engaged, it doesn't mean you're here only, wherever you are and you're following. It's been a whirlwind of terror and fear and frustration. And in the middle of all of that, you could have chosen to stay away and lead whatever a comfortable life means for you.
Yeah, of course, everybody can have that. I mean, any diasporan can have that choice. But I actually bought the apartment during the war on purpose. I wanted to make a statement.
And there were a few people like you who the war was a turning point for them. And they said, okay, enough, I need to be here.
I mean, for me, again, I have a unique experience. It wasn't such a turning point for me because I've been through that crisis in the 80s and, late 80s, 90s. I mean, to me, there have been many, very hard turning points. But I just felt that if I was, first of all, my mother passed away. And so now I'm the third generation. While I worked with her the whole time, I have to figure out what is my contribution. And I have 2 generations before me. And I think anybody who comes from that kind of legacy, they feel a tremendous pressure.
It's a burden.
It's a great burden because, first of all, I don't think I can live up to that level of legacy, but I have to do what I can do. I mean, my grandfather left this wonderful foundation with resources, and it's not something I consider it an
You can't walk away from it.
You cannot walk away from it. I mean, some people, they can give $50 million to a hospital in California or whatever. I was not brought up that way. I was brought up like, you have to go for impact. You have to, your goal is to change people's lives. I mean, this was the measure of success. The measure of success was whatever you did, do you improve people's lives?
Right.
And so if you didn't do your work. You got to keep, so this was, and then I mean, obviously, I feel that I want to honor their legacies by trying to continue and doing work. And so you go through this process of trying to decide, well, what could I do? You know, like what I see what they did. My grandfather did education in the diaspora because there wasn't an independent Armenia, and his obsession was to keep Armenians connected and a community and keep the culture alive. And my mother ended up doing higher education through AUA here. And I was looking at all the work that had been done in the country by diasporans and whatever. And the one thing I feel, right or I may be right or wrong, but I felt while these are islands of excellence that have been created, I didn't see systemic change.
Structural,
and
right.
This is really what I wanted to try to attempt, and I wanted to get into the public school system. I mean, I wanted the younger kids, and you know, I spent a year listening to ideas, and people proposed things. Oh, you should start these private schools, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, no, that's not really right, because first of all, that will be the best and the brightest. These kids are going to make it anyway. There are good private schools. What am I really accomplishing with that? And then I had somebody I was working with who had this idea to change the STEM education in high school, elementary and high schools. And I worked on it for like a year, but there were problems in the program, and I wasn't satisfied that it would work. I wasn't satisfied with the institution attached to it. And I mean, this brings us to what if I have to pinpoint the characteristics that really prevent us from reaching our potential, I would say it's ego and control.
Sure, there's plenty of it.
Well, not only plenty of it, if it dominates what you're trying to do.
Right.
So if a project is dominated by someone where the ego and control. I mean, as a lawyer, you know, I'm trained to look at foundation structure. I mean, that's what I always do. And accounting, but you know, structures. And so my question I always ask is it in the best interest of the project, the beneficiaries,
the stakeholders, sure.
Yeah, or the country. I mean, this is the only question that should govern the decision.
This is the problem that we have, right? Is we start a conversation and then it goes off on tangents. You decide to buy a house, a place,
because
during the war.
I wanted to...
Because you wanted to...
understand, like you come for 2 weeks, you stay in a hotel. Yes, you catch up with people, you have dinner, you have all this, but you don't really get to know. People don't open up until you have time. You don't get to know their families. You don't get to know the issues that they're struggling with. You don't get to know, I mean, maybe some people do, but in the context of a 2-3 week visit, in a hotel where you don't invite people to dinner, you know, you don't have this relaxed environment. And maybe you come twice a year. I just didn't feel I could really understand. And if I was going to make a contribution, even coming 30 years, with some gaps, but even coming 30 years, I didn't feel I really...
Yeah, because you stay for months at a time. It's not like you're in and out.
Now, 2 months at a time, yeah. And that has changed everything for me. That has changed everything. I mean, like...
Because you understand sort of the daily struggles now.
And people open up to you when you see the truth of a situation. They don't... You know, in the beginning, I mean, first people don't want to burden you. They want to put a good face on things. They, you know, they don't feel the liberty. But if you have time, if you're here. And the other thing is, I mean, my mother always taught me, I mean, my grandfather did this too, but my mother really taught me is you must go visit everything you're involved in. You have to go, you have to see, you have to make sure everything's working. You know, you can't just, and if you're here for a while, you don't just go 2 hours to something and it all looks great. I mean, there are other ways to know if it's really working. But I'm just saying, if you're really here, you get a feeling that I just don't believe you can get from visits, you know? And I mean, even with us, right? I mean, we developed a friendship through long conversations, through talking about issues, you know?
Oh, yeah.
and you know, if you come, I mean, okay, we have dinner, but I'm leaving in a week. I mean, maybe we have a second dinner, but it's not the same.
Right. I mean, you know a lot about my life. So, no, but I understand, you know, coming back to your grandfather.
But I just want to say one thing.
Sure.
It's not just about knowing a lot about your life. It also offered us the opportunity to discuss issues connected with work and whatever. And
the country, the state of
well, or even maybe issues you're dealing with in your work, and maybe I can listen. You know, I can offer support, whatever. And I think people underestimate how important that is.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you come, you bring equipment, you give this, you give that, but actually listening to people, and if you can offer input or support, I think that's part of what is a valuable thing for the diaspora and Armenians to do, you know, because that's a richer relationship.
And we could do a whole show on how you renovated the apartment.
Yes.
And all the lovely experiences you had.
That allowed me to learn a lot because, of course, I had somebody who helped me greatly with the apartment.
Who's in the audience
Who's in the audience.
Whose name will not be mentioned.
Yeah, I couldn't have done it without him. But we visited every place. And then so I saw these small and large businesses, talked with the owners, saw how things were working. I mean, that added another level of knowledge to my understanding of how things worked. And it also was during the war and just after the war. So, of course, people were also opening up about very personal things. Or if they didn't open up, you could see they were struggling with very personal things. But yeah, so that was also a great learning experience. And to be honest, I mean, that was not an easy experience, but the quality came out great. I mean, I was really impressed. I mean, it was, you know, very hard, but you know, I'm
so it's a very, we're a contradiction in terms. Things are very easy and at the same time very difficult in Armenia. Some things can happen in a second, and other things, you know, take 10 years off of your life. But at the same time, it's.
I think the problem we get in our way. I mean, I think there's a huge problem with management skills in the country. Okay, if people manage,
we don't think in terms of systems and management.
Well, yeah, and even with the apartment, I mean, one of the people was doing quite a bit of the work in my apartment. He did not have management skills, and so it wasn't just about my frustration with things not getting done, but he's wasting too much time on me. He should finish with me and move on to the next. And so even as a business, I was thinking, you know, this isn't good for you because you're taking so much time to do this. He didn't have a process that was efficient. He got stuck in this, you know. So we get in our way. And again, I would say the ego wanting to control the process, not have enough input. I mean, I think that if people had more input, trusted the input, or at least took the input and really evaluated it and used it, things could work much better and much quicker. And I think this is a big issue here. Like, you know.
You know, I think I'm going to come back to your grandfather. I'm kind of fixated on his story a little bit. And sometimes we take things for granted. We think everybody should know who Alex Manoogian was. But the young generation probably doesn't know very much. And as I was preparing for the interview, I do a lot of reading. So I was reading about your grandfather, even though the interview is about Քրիստին Սիմոնը, but I wanted to know about your grandfather. And, you know, born in the Ottoman Empire, in Smyrna, escaping the genocide, first went to Greece, then Canada. I didn't know the Canada
No, he didn't go to Canada.
No, that's what it said
Ellis Island.
Ellis Island. No, I know it was Ellis Island.
No, he never went to Canada.
Oh, that's on the company website.
Canada?
Yeah.
I will check.
Okay, well, maybe we take this part out. But yes, okay, well, this is what I read.
No,
okay.
he came from Kasaba, which is outside of Smyrna.
Right.
And then he came to Ellis Island. Then he went to Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Okay.
And then
okay. Love him. All right.
Detroit is close to Canada. I don't know, maybe they got that confused.
No, that was because anyway, that wasn't the point of the story. The point of the story is he arrives in America with not a lot of anything.
$50 and no English.
And no English. His father, though, was a successful grain wholesaler, but he comes and he has nothing. He goes on to build a very, very successful company, Masco Corporation. He goes on to, invent the one, whatever it's called, the one.
He perfected the faucet. He saw the faucet. Somebody had designed it, and he just fell in love. He was like, oh my God.
With the faucet, so.
He fell in love with the faucet, and he kept saying, why wouldn't somebody do something with one hand instead of two?
Right.
But it didn't work.
Right.
So he put a team together, he perfected it. He bought the design and then perfected it.
Right. Yeah. And then when he made it, it seemed his attention was on the diaspora. And there was a quote that, I hope this is right because I got it from the company website, but I wanted to read it because when I read it, it reminded me of you. Something that your grandfather said. You probably know this, but I'm just going to read it anyway. He said, do not be satisfied with average performance. Strive for excellence. If you cannot give your customers a better value and a better product, do not sell the product. In our years of friendship and knowing one another, you have a lot of grit and you have a lot of expectations, and you do it to elevate the person in front of you, to help them become better. Yeah,
as somebody I'm working with now at Visual Armenia on the interactive software, he always says standards.
Yes.
Standards.
Right. You said that to me too.
Yes.
No.
And this is, they definitely, and
it's about being accountable. Look, it's about, from your perspective as the philanthropist, right? Because I suppose I'm not in your position, so I'm making statements. Maybe I shouldn't. Like you said earlier, you could write a check and then walk away. But with Armenia, you can't just write a check and walk away. With Armenia, there's investment, and I don't mean monetary investment, right?
Yeah, and again, if you want impact, you can't just write the check.
Right.
You have to be involved. And after a certain minimal amount that I give, they like it or not, I'm going to be involved. I'm going to look at the accounting. And so that's what it's about. And again, a lot of maybe some of the early difficulties came. My mother was very direct. I used to have a joke because, of course, she taught me that, and I'm even more direct as a lawyer. And I used to say, well, we should have a T-shirt saying, "You think the mother's tough? You met the daughter." So, I push, and at first people maybe take it personally, and then you get into the conflict, and it's there's defensiveness. It doesn't. But
that's our default position. We're always defensive.
Yes, it is. But once somebody sees that it's about achieving the best, and they switch from the defensive position to trying to actually go on that path, then I think it works. And I see that sort of as the job of some types of philanthropists. Mm-hmm. Again, not every philanthropist wants to be involved, but it's about not only giving the money, but adding whatever skills or advice or whatever to get there and to get to the best place possible. And it's tough work. To have impact is not easy. No. So you're constantly discussing, evaluating, course correcting, seeing, is it happening the way you think? So that's the point. And yes, my grandfather was like that. My grandfather believed in that you had to do that, and my mother even more. My grandfather had a light touch. My mother didn't have such a life.
So, I was thinking, again, putting thought into because this was going to be for me a difficult interview because we're also friends. When we're not friends, it's easier for me. We've often talked about, the burden of legacy and how do you it's not about topping, but it's about continuing that legacy. And I was thinking about your grandfather, and there isn't an Armenian community on the planet that he has not affected or touched somehow. From a church to a community center to a school to whatever. So his focus was on the diaspora. And then your mother coming in 1982 and then her involvement with, the whole process up until she passed away, her focus was so much on Armenia. So I was thinking, so what is Chris's legacy? So I came up with a formula. I figured your grandfather, who's like a father to you, I think, in many ways, was about the diaspora. Your mom was about Armenia, and maybe Chris is the bridge.
Yeah, I mean, but I'm not that involved with the diaspora, to be honest with you. But I don't know if, I did write, well, I don't want to mention that, but I can do that here by being a bridge with myself to the diaspora, but I don't know that I'm not involved in the diaspora.
I don't mean about being involved. I mean about bringing that, like you were saying, the insight, the expertise, the knowledge, the experience in a way that's thoughtful, in a way that's respectful, in a way that elevates.
I think in the project I'm working on now with Visual Armenia, with this interactive software that goes into, that's in the public schools. We were talking about it, Hovhannes Hazarian, who is the founder and executive director of the foundation. We were talking about how it's sort of a perfect blend because there are certain things he knows organically from growing up here, from being here, and then there are certain ideas I bring that add a different thing. So, for instance, as I was saying, I was preoccupied with maybe doing a project with STEM in the schools because it was articulated as a priority, and
so everybody was talking about
everybody
STEM.
was talking about it, and I feel definitely, I'm sure you do too, I feel a sense of urgency.
Yeah, we all do. Yeah.
We have an urgency to get things in a better state, and so I thought that's the fastest route. But he was saying to me, no, history is important, humanity is important, but history, you have to know who you are. You have
social sciences, absolutely.
and it will build more patriotic, connected people to the country, and they'll have better critical thinking because if you know the history and you know the present, you can look at patterns and I have confessed to him that I didn't see it in the beginning. I supported it, a little bit, but I didn't see it the same way. And I think that's the beauty of diaspora in Armenia, is to have the respect for the idea, even if you don't fully see it the same way. And I now definitely see that. I see it with the kids.
You're seeing the impact, right?
Yes, when I see these kids drawing comparison between agreements that were made in the 7th century to negotiations today, I think yes, this is really important, and it's it's our story. I mean, it's like knowing what. Anyway, so to me that's a beautiful blend of the two cultures. And I'm tough and I'm pushing and I'm like, more subjects, faster, more grades. And, so I think that works well. And I would love to see more of that, true partnership, and trust and respect. And believe me, it didn't come easy.
Nothing does it?
Yeah, I mean, we had difficult days in the beginning, but we found a place where there's a level of real trust, and now it's just discussing and working things out.
Well, as I say, Miss Simone, thank you so much. I know you don't give many interviews or any interviews. Thank you for sharing a little part of your life and your journey with us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for asking me. Bye.